Good morning, everyone. Today is Thursday, May 7th, and this is your screencast video lesson for pages 2 and 3 in our Unit 6 packet. We're going to be talking about the trans-Saharan trade routes and camel caravans. So let's jump over to our packet. Just to back up a second or two, yesterday we did an introduction talking about gold versus salt, some of these items that were important then and important to us now, and were traded in the trans-Saharan area back in Northwest Africa back in these Middle Age times. So we're going to continue talking about trade and geography. Those two elements are going to be really important for our focus for this unit, and we're also going to get into a couple of rulers and explorers that travel and trade in this area too. So on pages 2 and 3, the top question for page 2 is, how did new technology facilitate and improve travel in the desert of the trans-Saharan trade routes? So to zoom out and give you a little bit of a bigger picture of where we're talking about, look over on our trade routes map. The red trade route is the trans-Saharan trade routes. So this is the northern section of Africa. It actually does kind of separate what we consider two parts of Africa. We have North Africa, which would be the very, very coast section of Africa next to the Mediterranean Sea, and over here towards the Middle East. You'll see like the Nile River, part of Egypt, and the Atlas Mountains. This is like a modern day location of the country of Morocco, which where Ibn Battuta, one of our key explorers, will be from later. And the Saharan Desert goes across this whole area, and it separates those northern countries like Morocco and Egypt, the ones that are closer to the Mediterranean, from the southern section or sub-Saharan sections of Africa. All the jungles, and then down here like South Africa, island of Madagascar. All right, so our purpose for reading today is to identify the problems traders and travelers faced in the North African Sahara Desert and learn how they overcame those problems. So read along with me, and I'll answer a couple of those questions on the slides in just a moment. For several centuries, these contacts, those between North Africa and the interior of Africa, were limited by the nature of the Sahara itself. More than 3 million square miles in area, the Sahara is the world's largest desert. Because temperatures during the day can reach as high as 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and supplies of water are scant, which means rare or scarce, the 40-day journey across the desert required courage, determination, and careful planning. So we have two questions to think about and to answer based off of what we know of geography and some of the problems that people would face going across the desert. So our two questions are, what problem did the traders and travelers face in North Africa? And then this is not a new theme or a new issue that we've studied. So I have a little recall question to see what we remember about the same issue coming up earlier. So I'm going to jump over to our slide so we can fill this out together. So what problems would traders or travelers face in the trans-Saharan trade routes going across the desert? Well, it's a desert and it's the largest one in the world. So our response should be something like, they would have to travel vast distances across the Sahara Desert, which we know gets really, really hot in the daytime, and actually at nighttime it can get pretty darn cold too. And they would have to go across these miles and miles of desert with very, very little water supplies. So again, not a new problem or issue that we've studied before, but we're going to find out and try to think about what kind of adaptations, what kinds of technology they use to overcome these problems on the next page. So to help us in transition to that, I want to recall this same issue that we saw in a previous unit. So take a moment here, read this with me, and then I'm going to have you guys pause the video and try to answer this on your own before I discuss it with you. So this recall question is, what other region did we learn about this year where traders and travelers experienced the same problems? How did they overcome these problems? So think about crossing a desert, traders, what did they use? How did they overcome these kinds of problems in a previous unit? And where were we talking about in that previous unit? So pause this right here for a second. See if you can respond to that on your own, and then come back and we'll discuss it together. Okay. So there's a few different regions that we sort of talked about crossing large deserts, but the most famous and most recent one that we covered is the Arabian Desert in the Middle East. This was from our unit 4, the Islam and the Middle Eastern civilizations. So on our map over here, you can see where the Arabian Desert, or if you also said Arabian Peninsula, which is one of the geographic features we were calling it, you would be correct too. Most of this Arabian Peninsula was desert. Around the edges, you had some, more coastal and vegetative areas, but they had the same issues of crossing this desert as they were going through these trade routes that connected in the Middle Eastern region. So if we think back to how the people in the Arabian Desert overcame the problem of having to cross a very hot desert for miles and miles with very little water, we might recall the fact that they would sometimes travel at night when it was cooler, and especially when the moon was full and provided a lot of light, rather than going across the desert in the hot sun. They also used camels so that they could either ride on or pack the camels to carry their cargo. And thirdly, they built oasis towns around oases of water. So, the scant supplies of water that were here and there speckled around the desert. And they would use these as a rest and resupply stop. So some of those cities, like Mecca, ended up developing into larger desert towns and cities, first starting as little oasis towns around a supply of water that was important for these travelers and traders. So as we go on to the next page, we'll see if the travelers and traders in the Sahara Desert are going to use any of the same adaptations as the travelers and traders in the Arabian Desert. Okay, so on page 3 of our packet, it's called Camel Caravans in the Trans-Saharan Trade Routes. So yes, these travelers and traders in the Sahara will be using a very similar, we're going to call it technology, but it's an animal. They're going to be using camels to help them adapt to their climate. So the context and directions, let's read this together. The Trans-Sahara Trek became somewhat easier after the 4th century CE, when camels were introduced in place of horses for travel and trade. So first off, they started to use horses, but in the 4th century Common Era, right around the time when Islam was spreading out of the Arabian Desert, out of the Middle East, into places like Africa. We'll see how Islam affects, the spread of Islam affects this whole situation as we go forward into this unit too. So camels were introduced in place of horses for trade and travel. We're going to read the text together, analyze the images, and watch a video clip at the bottom of the page to answer the questions below. So let's read this together. Arabian camels, also known as dromedaries, have only one hump, but they employ it to great effect. The hump stores up to 80 pounds of fat, which a camel can break down into water and energy when sustenance is not available. Excuse me. So sustenance is basically a fancy word meaning a good supply of food and water that will give somebody enough energy to go on for a long time. These humps give camels their legendary ability to travel up to 100 desert miles without water. Camels rarely sweat, even in desert temperatures that reach 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So when they do take in fluids, they can conserve them for long periods of time. To conserve something means to use it just a little bit here and there when you need it, but not to overdo it and to use it up quickly. In winter, even desert plants may hold enough moisture to allow a camel to live without water for several weeks. When camels do refill, however, they soak up water like a sponge. A very thirsty camel can drink 30 gallons, which is the same as 135 liters. So think of a liter of soda that you would buy at Stewart's or something. They can drink 30 gallons or 135 liters of water in only 13 minutes. Other adaptations, as this diagram points out, so feel free to zoom in and take a closer peek at some of these natural features the camel has. Other adaptations help dromedaries thrive in desert conditions. Their nostrils close to keep sand at bay. They have bushy eyebrows and 2 rows of long eyelashes to protect their eyes from the sand. Large, tough lips enable them to pick at dry and thorny desert vegetation. Big, thick foot pads help them navigate the rough, rocky terrain and shifting desert sands. Arabian camels have been domesticated, meaning tamed and controlled by humans, for approximately 3,500 years and have been long valued as pack animals. So they can carry large loads for up to 25 miles a day. People would pack them down with their cargo. All right, so that's a little bit about how these traders are adapting what we're calling a piece of technology in a camel, an Arabian camel for that matter, ones with only 1 hump. Sometimes you've probably seen pictures of camels with 2 humps. They're from different regions, but the Arabian camel, the dromedaries, have 1 hump. And because Islam is spreading out of the Middle East into North Africa, as we're going to see throughout this unit, they're bringing some of their culture, including the Arabian camel, the dromedaries, with them. So there is a video clip here down here too that I also want you to take a look at. I'm not going to view that with you just for the sake of time, but it will help give you more information to give so that we can answer and respond to these questions more thoroughly. So it's only about 2 or 3 minutes long. Go ahead and pause the video now if you like, or you can come back and watch this on your own. So we're going to answer these 3 questions over in our slides. And this is our last little part for today. So question 3 says, what is the name of the technology traders and travelers developed to make the travel and trade across the Sahara Desert easier? They're Arabian camels, but their names are dromedaries. And they're very unique because they have just the 1 hump, but they have all these other adaptations too that they employ to adapt themselves to the desert. So question 4, how did this new technology of an Arabian camel make trade and travel across the Sahara easier? So as we respond to this one, think about these natural adaptations that the camel has. How could people use this camel that's so perfectly suited to the desert to get across the desert? Well, we said that the problem of crossing the desert was that it was really hot. There was very little supply of water for people to rely on. And when you're crossing the desert as a trader, you're usually bringing a lot of stuff with you. Items, goods, money that has a lot of weight to it. So this camel not only can travel across the desert long distance with a little bit of water, but they're also perfectly suited to carry a lot of weight too. So our response could be something like this. These camels could go up to 100 miles without water, and they could carry heavy loads, which means more water for the people and less cargo those people had to carry. So because these animals were used so perfectly to help traders and travelers cross a hot desert, they kind of adapted a couple of phrases, of nicknames for them. So question 5 says, why do you think camels are called ships of the desert? And also, Ata Allah, meaning gift of God. This is what they call these perfectly adapted camels that they use to cross the desert. So this, of course, is going to be an opinion question. This is your response, but think about the analogy that's being made here. Ships of the desert. think about how a regular ship crosses the sea, and Ata Allah, gift of God. Also think about some of the natural, or so to speak, God-given adaptations that the camel has. So in your response, why do you think camels are called ships of the desert? And Ata Allah, gift of God. Consider those points as you respond to this question. And that is the end of our pages that I want to cover today. But I do want to go back to our schedule just to remind you of a few things. So tomorrow, there will be one more screencast video for pages 4 and 5, where we start to look at the civilizations, the West African kingdoms that arise from this trade that's happening of gold and salt using these camels. So after that screencast video, I will also have some review questions posted on a Google form, and that's what is due tomorrow at the end of the day. However, if you are a little behind on going through these pages and you need more time, I certainly understand that you guys have other classes that sometimes load you up with a lot of stuff as well. So the review questions will be posted tomorrow, and I'm placing it on our assignments due schedule for tomorrow, but it's not a big deal at all if you need the rest of the weekend or if they end up coming in on Monday. Just try to get them done as soon as you can so that on Monday you're not too far behind, because we'll be going on to a new page in our packet after the weekend. All right, guys, have a great day. Enjoy the sun outside if you can get all your schoolwork done. Take a walk, take a bike ride, soak up some vitamin D. Stay happy and healthy and positive. And if you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. All right, bye-bye.